Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Curious Realms continuing coverage of the Fouke Monster Festival, coming to you live from Fouke, Arkansas. We are here at the table with one of our favorite researchers, one of our favorite guests. The amazing Ryan Edwards was here speaking about his new book, Sasquatch, A Prehistory of a Living Legend. And this book is filled with such amazing stuff, man. I love your work because you, much like King Gerhard, come at it from the point of view of zoo and then crypto. You know, let's look at things in the point of view of, like, could an environment sustain a species of this size? Those kind of things first.
Yeah, like, that's one thing that really we don't talk about a lot in this field, is the ideas of zoology and ecology. Like cryptoecology, that should be a thing right there. Like,
yes.
For instance, when people bring up, oh, I have Dogman and Bigfoot on my property, that's not likely because they would compete each other to extinction. Like, there's ideas of carrying capacities. Like, an environment can only carry so many animals. It can only have so many large predators and, like, niches. That's something that is not talked about with cryptozoology.
Yeah.
Like, if Sasquatch is real and it's a living, breeding species, what's its niche? What does it eat? How does it exist? Where does it exist? What type of environments? That's something that really isn't discussed a lot, which I believe should be discussed. And not with just Sasquatch, but all types of cryptids. Like, for instance, we bring up the Dogman phenomena. At one point, when I was younger, I thought Dogman was a physical, living, breathing creature. I know now I'm wrong, because it can't exist. It's ecologically can't exist, because it's seen in the same areas as Bigfoot and, like, bears. They outcompete each other. Secondary is, like, how it looks. The adaptation of bipedal locomotion on a digitigrade is very unlikely. Very unlikely. So if you look at the, like, morphologies, the behaviors, and the ecology of certain cryptids, they simply can't exist in a physical realm. That's the thing. They can exist. Maybe something more spiritual, metaphysical, but something else, not zoological.
Yeah, and that's a topic that we've discussed numerous times, not only on the show, but with you, is the idea that, yes, I believe that there is a large hominid species roaming the forests of North America and beyond.
Yeah.
But I also believe in these other phenomena. I believe, because I'm an experiencer myself, Ryan. I have had my experiences that, like, people were right there and didn't have that. Like, I was just in the car the other day with somebody who was, like, physically no further away than you and I, when I had the religious experience that moved me to enter the seminary. Like, when I was in what I know to be the true presence of God, and I looked him in the eye and I was like, were you there with me? Did you see that? Was it quantifiable to you?
Yeah.
Were any of the other 500 people at Mass that day in that moment with me? Like, none of the other altar servers experienced it. You know, it was my experience. So I am prone to believe any experiencer until proven otherwise.
Yes.
And yeah, I believe that much like you're saying, that these things are much more paranormal in nature, maybe along the lines of the Fae, fairies, things like that, where they are more than willing to adapt and change to whatever you would be okay with.
No, like, me and Jason McLean were having a conversation about that actually on the way here. The ideas of Sasquatch.
Yeah.
There's ideas that they braid horses' hair and that they make these nests and things like that. Do you know what those would have been called in Europe a couple hundred years ago? Fairy knots. Yeah. The idea is that the fairies would tie horses' hair and things like that together. And then nowadays, we're just moving it from fairies to Bigfoot. Yeah. Or think about, like the black shuck. The ideas of demon dogs, hellhounds in ancient Europe and Britain. Nowadays, what do we get? Black panthers. Yeah. That appear and disappear out of nowhere. Is this the exact same phenomenon, but just changed species? Or is it not? Because, like, one thing, like, with the Black Panther phenomena and the ABC alien big cats. Yeah. Why are they almost always Black Panthers? Like, we knew for sure the Big Cat Removal Act in 1970, all big cats, a lot of them were released into the wilds of, like, Great Britain. Yeah. Tigers, lions, ocelots, cheetahs. Really? Leopards. Really? But why do we only get sightings of the black cats now? People don't talk about seeing leopards. People don't talk about seeing
tigers,
ocelots, and tigers. Just primarily black felines. So, which is understandable if they survive, but why wouldn't the other ones survive?
Well, and once again, when you start looking back at the history of the area and seeing things like the black dogs, things like that. I mean, Sherlock Holmes, the Hound of the Baskervilles, is based on that lore.
Like the ideas of the black shuck back in the day. The stories of that it would go into like a church and the claw marks are still there today.
Yeah.
What if instead of black shuck, now we have the beast of Exmoor, the beast of Bodmin Moor, the Surrey Puma? I'm not necessarily saying these.
Jeverdane?
Basically, Jeverdane, that's French.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily saying these animals are not there physically. Of course, there's physical animals. There's depredation of livestock. There are footprint finds, things like that. But there's a lot of phenomena occurring alongside it that doesn't make any sense zoologically. Like there's signs of them just disappearing out of nowhere.
Yeah.
So maybe there's two. Like what I say a lot. There's two things happening here. There's more than one thing occurring. There has to be something that's like zoological, but there's something else happening. Like the same thing with Sasquatch. Me, in my opinion, Sasquatch is a physical, living, breathing creature. But what happens when you see a Bigfoot in the middle of your room? Or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Or when you see, as we've said before on the show with you, like when you see Bigfoot walk through a portal or walk out of one. Now you're looking at two totally separate phenomena occurring simultaneously, and at which point do you start investigating? Do you investigate the portal first, or do you investigate the Sasquatch first?
Yeah.
You know, because you've got a branched investigation there, and you have to figure out one of the anomalies before the other.
Yes.
You know, which are both pretty hard provable, and that's a conversation that we were having with Brandy Butler a while ago, or Butcher rather, from Blondes and Booze. Was I am semantically getting away from the term evidence. I am dropping that from my vocabulary, because evidence to me is what you give your lawyer to say, this will exonerate me. This will set me free. Yeah. So unless a picture is to the point of that, it's data.
Yeah.
And scientifically, we need to be increasing the data field, gathering more points of data.
Yeah, like that's what I talked about a little bit in my lecture, because we had a little Q&A, and one question was like, if I'm doing field work, what should I do? And I'm like, well, remember, collect data.
That's right.
Collect it properly. If you go in and don't collect it properly, don't do the right channels, things like that, then it's no longer scientific.
Yeah.
If we keep it scientific to the nose, that's what we need. Like, of course, a good friend of ours, Shelley Covington in Montana, always talks about that.
That's right. I love her.
Citizen scientists.
That's right.
There's a proper procedure on how to collect data. If you don't do that correctly, then it's not true data.
Well,
it's skewed.
And even to the point, like we were talking with Chester Moore earlier, the fact of you're out in the field investigating for a week, you've gathered a sample. How do you procure that and make sure that it's still viable for lab use after you're out in the field with it for a week? Yeah. How do you make sure it doesn't get contaminated? How do you make sure that it doesn't get deprecated DNA-wise? Things like that. Are you taking those steps with your points of data?
Yeah. For instance, I brought up, okay, one big thing that we're really big into right now is eDNA, environmental DNA. Okay, cool. You have a Sasquatch print. Don't cast it immediately. Grab some dirt from the bottom of it. Yeah. See if you can possibly get eDNA for it. But it also brings in the question of, there's another question that was pointed to me that I liked. What do you think is going to prove that some of these species exist? Yeah. Because technically, there are labs that have gotten back unknown primate DNA before.
Yes, there are.
Yet, has KINS 5 talked about finding Bigfoot? Or Fox News, we discovered Sasquatch? No. So DNA is not the whole thing.
But we also, there were just new species of primates discovered in Borneo. Yep. These discoveries are ongoing. It's not like we've discovered all primates across the globe. You know, it's not like we've discovered all marine life across the globe. So we can totally totally cut out Nessie, totally cut out Ogopogo, totally cut out Champ. You can get rid of them. We've discovered all the sea life. No, we haven't. Not even in our lakes and rivers have we discovered all the life. So this is science. It's ongoing. The day it becomes static, it's no longer science.
It's dogma.
It's dogma.
You want to stay away from dogma and like the ideas of like changing and adapting and evolving.
Right.
Like for instance, like it's getting brought up a lot today of like me being one of the youngest researchers in the field.
I love it.
But also that brings up different ideal points, different ideas.
That's right.
Of like maybe this next generation can bring in new ideas.
It's fresh ideas, and that's
Yeah.
just it. That's what's necessary in science is the fresh perspective. And I say it regularly on the show. I am glad that UFO was relabeled to UAP.
Yeah.
Because once you include phenomena, now science cannot ignore it. It's their due
Yeah.
diligence and their duty to explore that 5% anomaly in the experiment.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what was the anomaly? I don't know. Did you investigate it? Nah. What?
It's
You
like
know,
you wanna
like
try
that's
to prove-
literally the job of an experiment.
Yeah, and like that brings in the ideas of like the science in this. Like one thing I always bring up is like ology is in the word of cryptozoology.
That's right.
Ufology. It's about the science.
It's a study.
Of it. It's a study. It's of like, okay, how can we go in here and not just be a bunch of rednecks with guns going out there looking for Bigfoot?
And that brings up a very good point because, and I want to marry that and loop it back to a thought that you just mentioned, which is one of the youngest published cryptozoologists out there. I'm not going to say that there aren't other people out
Yeah.
there doing field work. I'm not going to say that there aren't other people out there doing hard, good research. But you're one of the youngest published cryptozoologists out there. 2 books, nether almost finished at the age of 23. And my brother and I, we come from a teaching family. You're a teacher during your day job. It's one of those, like, the example I give is when I walk into a Knights of Columbus meeting.
Yeah.
You typically think Knights of Columbus, the old guys with the fish fry. Well, because they're a bunch of old guys.
Yeah.
And when I walk in at a year and a half under 50, they're like, whoa, look the young buck. Make sure and buy him a beer so he sticks around, man. Like, he'll bring his buddies. Like, if I'm the young one that you're courting, you need to go to a younger demographic if you want this to go on another 30 years.
Yeah. And
You
like,
know? Because
yeah.
my 30 is going to be 80. I'm going to be the dude like, oh, look at that 50-year-old young buck. Let's get him in here. Like, we need people your age to be enthused about this.
And like that's the thing is like I've seen there's a couple of good researchers out there now. People like Nate Brislin, Emily Fleur, that they bring in new perspectives and they're young, they're in their 20s, and I'm like, okay, that's what we really need. Like I would love like this is something I brought up to like different conferences. Have a newcomer speaker.
That's right.
Like have one slot open for someone that maybe has never spoken before, or someone that's just getting into the field. Because a lot of times too, it's the ideas of like, oh, I'm out there with Lyle Blackburn, I'm out there with Ken Gerhard. I don't want to do it. I want to walk away. Like I'm not big enough for this. But yet a lot of researchers have that idea, and it's like, no, bring out your ideas. Like even if they're different from the people that have it, bring it out.
Well, and it's the fact of, in a lab, if you're in a lab setting, if you're not challenging the data at hand, if you're not challenging the experiment, if you're not poking and prodding from a different direction, you're not getting new data.
Yeah.
You know, you're rehashing old data all the time. And that's why, you know, like Tex Wesson, who's speaking right now, was saying, like, I was like, did you get your stories today? He's like, I got about 6 or 7 good ones last night. You know, because people like him, he's writing books and doing shows about people's experiences specifically. I talk to mainly researchers, authors, that kind of stuff in the field. People like him and Josh and that kind of stuff talk to a lot more experiencers and gather a lot more stories. And that in and of itself is a whole different realm of data.
And you need to get that marriage of like, that's why I work with text a lot. Because I'm like, okay, cool. I think this. What have your eyewitnesses said?
Exactly.
Like, for instance, I'll give you a best example. Handprints. For this newest book, I was doing a section on handprints. And I was like, wait, Tex, you have a couple eyewitnesses that talked about leaving handprints, right? I'm like, cool, can I see the data? And he showed me, and I'm like, I looked at the pictures. I'm like, wait, that supports my hypothesis. Okay, this doesn't support my hypothesis. Okay, it's that talking from the researcher.
That's right.
To the actual, like, field researcher.
Yes.
Like, I'll admit it. I am a armchair researcher to an extent.
You're-
I don't really do the field work as much.
You're a library researcher.
Yeah.
Which is utterly necessary.
Yeah, you need both.
That's right.
That's why I try not to let other people judge other like researchers. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you go sit in the library. Oh, you're not a real researcher.
Well, that's like saying that the theoretical physicist that designs the rocket isn't as necessary as the dude who physically built the engine and motor in the rocket.
Yeah, and also it's funny too because like also the ideas of like one big thing with this is the ideas of ego.
Yeah.
Because think about that. Who gets all the fame and fortune from that?
Yeah.
The astronaut in the rocket ship.
That's right. That's right.
It's the people that are in
Yeah.
the field that get a lot of the attention that some of the researchers that in the background don't really get.
That's
and
right. Yeah.
I think that's why a lot of people try to get away from that. They want to go towards like the sensationalistic aspects of like going in the field, hunting monsters, and getting all these stories and being a good storyteller. Yes, that's a part of it. But the real science of it is doing the legitimate field work.
Yeah.
And being behind the scenes saying, okay, I have all this data. What does this data say?
Well, and very much like whenever we've interviewed Adam Davies on the show about his expeditions, the stories is where he starts.
Yeah.
He ain't going somewhere to search for the Yeti in the Himalayas if there aren't locals talking about having seen a Yeti.
Yeah.
But at the same token, he takes that, then starts looking at the region in the area, and will it support that animal?
Yeah.
Will it support this? Could this viably be there? And if those two things don't jibe, we ain't going to the Himalayas.
Yeah.
You know, like that's parts 1 and 2 of the equation. You know, that's like building a wall without a foundation.
Yeah.
You know? So you start with the stories. You start with tribal stories, things like
for
that.
instance, with cryptozoology, one thing I look at is First Nation stories, like
Absolutely.
old indigenous oral traditions. If this cryptid, like, bring up the rake, for instance, they only came out last 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
There's no oral traditions of it, then the likelihood of it existing is very unlikely in my eyes. Like, most cryptids I research have an oral tradition. Thunderbirds, Sasquatch, to an extent Dogman, but it's primarily a recent occurrence. A lot of these lake monsters, the Shankawawakeen, the Wahila, have a old tradition that go back hundreds or even thousands of years. But yet, things like the rake, to an extent like all these other like creepypasta style cryptids, have only come out in the past 20 years. And know what's also come out recently? The internet.
That's right.
These are what I like to call internet cryptids. Ones that have kind of taken over cyberspace and now have taken up people's minds.
Well, and a prime example of that is what we know as chupacabra. You know, what we know as chupacabra. You know, it's why when people see like the Texas blue dogs and the chupacabras that we have here in Texas are like, that's not the chupacabra. It's like, yes, because the one you're talking about is the one from Puerto Rico that made its fame on the internet when people like Craig Woolheaters started Cryptomundo.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, I also bring this up, and so does Ken. Chupacabra, goat sucker. It's describing a characteristic, a behavior, not a physical description.
Exactly.
So you can say anything's a chupacabra if it's eating
exsanguinating.
Goat's blood. Yeah, you can
animals.
even say, oh, that guy's drinking goat blood. He's a chupacabra.
Yeah.
It's a behavior, not a physical description.
Yeah. Yeah, precisely. And you know, I know it seems very semantical, folks, but it's important to make the differentiations. It's important to recognize the differentiations.
Yeah, like one thing I brought up with the presentation today was nomenclature. The ideas of colloquial names. Like I've gotten plenty of times where people are like, oh yeah, the Sasquatch of Canada and the Bigfoot of the United States. I'm like, what do you mean? So yeah, Sasquatch is seen in Canada. It's not seen in the United States. I'm like, it's the same thing. It's just different names. Or like the Ohio Grassman, Fouke Monster, the Honey Island Swamp Monster, Skunk Ape. All these aren't just different types of Bigfoot. They're all the same thing, but just different names for it.
Yeah.
Puma, mountain lion, catamount, Felis concula. All the same thing. It's a cougar, but just by different names.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it goes into fisheries. Everything is like that, where there are colloquial local names. Like I'm a Cajun. We call freshwater white drum Gaspergoo. They're just a white drum. Like, hey, white drum. Like, no, we call it a gaspergoo. That's what it's called.
Yeah.
You know? So that exists all over the place. And it is important to understand that. And it's important to know that, yes, they may be talking about a local variety or variation of an animal, a morphology of an animal, but it's the same, pretty much the same species or subspecies.
Yeah. Or like how many times I get so annoyed by this, like if someone sees a white Bigfoot, oh, I saw the Yeti. I'm like, you didn't see the Yeti, you saw a white Bigfoot, you saw a Sasquatch with white fur.
Yeah.
Just because it has white fur doesn't mean it's a Yeti. And also, technically, the Yeti didn't have white fur in the first place. That's something that came around because of Rudolph.
That's right.
Abominable, because, it's white, it lives in the snow, white fur. Everyone thinks Yetis are white now. No, they actually have red or black fur.
Yeah.
But someone sees a Sasquatch deep in the mountains. Oh, I saw the Yeti. It's like, no. Yeti's a Tibetan name used in Tibet.
Yeah.
It's like almost like a
yowie.
A cryptid cultural appropriation almost.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like,
yeah. I mean,
like, don't use the wrong name for a different type of creature.
Yeah, you could say you saw a yowie too. It's the same thing, just in Australia.
Yeah.
You know? And that's just it. These things have been reported for generations across mankind throughout time. And it's interesting to see. One of the things you brought up as we wrap up this segment, one of the things you brought up in your talk today, which I really loved, was the longevity to discovery. The idea that we heard about lowland gorillas, we'd heard stories of them. We didn't actively discover them till 100 years later.
No.
You know? And though there have been cultural stories of Yeti, Sasquatch, Yowie, what have you, across the globe, what we know publicly and majoritively across the globe only really came about in the 60s.
Yeah.
You know, like we
haven't
hit that 70-year time frame.
For instance,
yet.
like the abominable snowman. They only came around like the 20s and the 30s thanks to like Europeans going to the Himalayas for the first time.
That's right.
And hearing stories of this Yeti or the Tengu or whatever creature they were using, the Almo, and then it got bastardized into abominable snowman.
Yeah.
And then but for a while we were doing a lot of expeditions, but like with a timeline of discovery. We haven't hit that timeline of discovery for Sasquatch yet. Yeah. Like, we're collecting the data still. We're still finding out what this thing is. Then we can try to discover it. Because, like, how can you ever try to discover the animal if you don't know exactly what it is? If it's a human-like primate, okay, there's certain things we can do. If it's an ape, there's certain things we can do. That's why, like, when my research into, like, the origins of Sasquatch and what it really is, a lot of people are like, well, that's not necessary. You just research it. Well, I want to know what I'm researching.
Yeah, you've got, and that's just it. It's a lot easier to hit the dartboard in the dark if you know what a dartboard looks like.
Yeah.
You know the basic shape and size.
Yeah.
Where it should be on a wall. Yeah. Then you can turn the lights off and take a shot in the dark. But you got to have some bases there, you know, and that's just it. When it comes to this information and finding it and gathering it, it's the fact of looking at things with new eyes, being willing to let things go, being willing to let new ideas come in.
Yeah.
You know, and especially when it comes to involving the next generation, involving the future generation with this, and getting them interested beyond the point of red circles, interested beyond the point of pareidolia, interested to a point of science is sexy. Ryan, is what I want to say. I would love to see, like, okay, before we end the 10 o'clock news tonight, hey, just so you know, they turned light into matter. That's a pretty sexy story, everybody. Let's talk about that. Like, you don't hear that at the end of the news. You don't hear new species discovered.
Or you do, and it kind of comes across like romanticized. Yeah. Like you have like, a lone researcher going in the jungles late and like discovering a whole new species. It's not like that. We're not Indiana Jones in here. Yeah. It's like
nobody's researching this in a vacuum because you can't research in a vacuum.
Yeah. So like you kind of have to bring in that tantalizing, like the romanticize it to an extent, but at the same time still grounded. Keep it grounded.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, to loop this right back to the beginning, that is what I love about your work. That is what I love about this book, is how well grounded and how well founded it is. Yes, there is hypothesis in here. Because science requires hypothesis. That's quite literally the first step of science. With no hypothesis, there is no science. Yeah. So if you aren't thinking outside of the box, you aren't doing science. You know, absolutely incredible stuff. Thank you as always for coming on, man. I love our conversations. I love when we get to hang out like this. Yeah. Let everybody know where they can get their copy of Sasquatch: A Prehistory, of course, as well as your other book, Cryptids of the World. Yep.
If you want to check out Cryptids of the World or Sasquatch: A Prehistory, check it out on Amazon. Look up Ryan Edwards. I did look up the titles. You're going to easily find them there. As well, Sasquatch: A Prehistory. It was created by David Weatherly's publishing company, Area Lights. If you look up Area Lights, it'll probably be one of the first books to come up. It's fairly new. Only got published back in March. So, right off the presses, you can be probably some of the first people to get it.
Absolutely awesome, man. Once again, thank you so much for speaking today. It was a fantastic presentation. I love your work. I cannot wait to see what the next book brings about. While you are online checking out all of the amazing work of Ryan Edwards and getting his book, Sasquatch: A Prehistory of a Living Legend, make sure to stop on by Curious Realm. CuriousRealm.com/store is where you can find all the books, videos, music, classes, all that good stuff by our guests. CuriousRealm.com/live is where you can watch us live every Tuesday. If you're a Roku user, make sure to download our free Roku app full of all the episodes as well as tons of live music, binaural beat meditation tracks made by yours truly. Stay tuned through these quick breaks. When we come back, we will have more of our continuing coverage of the Fouke Monster Festival right here in Fouke, Arkansas, right after this, folks.